Okay, doing a Soundipity tutorial. So I can share a bit about how it works and how you can use it to generate interesting sounding music. So let's start with a new file. And I'm on an iPad today. Okay, this is what it looks like when you're presented with a new file. Now, the first thing to note is that Soundipity generates MIDI signals, so you need another program running in the background to actually generate the sounds themselves. So you can see what your MIDI connections are. Here I've got Logic Pro running in the background. You can also do if you have other MIDI devices, they'll show up here, other MIDI programs. So if we look over in Logic Pro, what is going on there? So I've got 3 MIDI tracks and an audio track, and the 3 tracks are programmed to go to different MIDI channels as input. So there's drums, there's bass, and there's keyboard, and the drums are on channel 10, the bass is on channel 2, and the keyboard is on channel 1. So I like Logic Pro because you can separate out the tracks with different channels, and then from Soundipity we can actually select which channel it's going on, and will let us play all the different instruments here. So once you have that set up, then the sounds that you're generating, the MIDI you're generating from Soundipity will flow over to Logic Pro and actually generate the sounds. So now that we have that hooked up, if I press play, we'll immediately hear it start playing over in Logic. So it's on channel 1, so it's going to the keyboard. All right, so let's focus in on a single voice. So by default, when the program boots up, it just puts you in the key of C and it gives you 2 voices here. So each voice is basically has the ability to generate a single line, a single melodic line. And so if I turn the second voice off, then we only hear 1 note playing at a time, and I can turn them both off. So you'll notice that Soundipity is interactive. You can tweak these things. So I'm just going to leave it playing and then change some of the interact with the program, and it will change how it's playing while I'm interacting. So let's focus in on a single voice, what you can do with that to start. So one of the important sliders is this note probability. So it basically tells you how often it's going to play. 100% means it plays all the time. 0 means it never plays. And then you can pick somewhere in between. And then velocity is the MIDI velocity, how hard it's hitting the note. And then chord mode is basically what notes it's going to use from the chord. So you could also turn that off, and then it will be totally atonal, for example. But we'll keep it playing the chord for now. These min and max are basically the range of notes that it's going to play within, so it'll stay within that range. And then all the way over here are the rhythms that it's controlling. So right now we're doing 1, so that basically is a quarter note. You could up that to 8th notes or combinations therein. And then I'll use both those, or you can go to 16th notes only, then it's going to start playing pretty fast. So we'll keep it at 8th notes for now. And this control in the middle lets you use intervals. So by default, it's just picking random notes in that min-max range that you have set over here. But we can turn on intervals, and then it will actually use intervallic choices. So 0, just repeat, repeat, repeat. 1, a little more interesting, means it's going to go up or down in the chord notes. And this up or down slider basically picks if it's going up or if it's going down. So now you can hear it's always going up. And this picks what it does when it hits the boundary. So rap means if it hits the top, if you're going up, it'll jump to the bottom and loop it. Reflect means that it will actually bounce off those boundaries. And you can hear too that it's abiding by the actual chord mode it's playing. So because we have it specified to chord, it's playing chord tones. If we change that to scale, for example, it'll start playing the scale. And then if you wanted to play like thirds within the scale, you can press 2, and then it'll do that. You can do interesting things, like if you start changing the boundaries, can see it's oscillating between the two different third patterns you can get from the scale, just because when it loops around, it ends up on a different part of the chord. So you can get some really interesting textures effects by how you're selecting intervals, how you're selecting min-max. Another important feature is looping. So if you press loop, what it's going to do is it'll start repeating the notes it's been using. So we'll get it playing something. So once you press it, then the next 4 beats, it's going to start using those for a loop. So now it's looping. And you can control how many beats. So 2 beats, 4 beats. We'll come to what this pin means a little later. Okay, so now we have that voice looping. So let's turn on the other voice now. And let's actually change it, make it play the bass. So if we change the channel, it'll play one of the other channels. Okay, so now we have bass and we have some nice keyboard pattern. Let's add another voice so we can get some drums going. So when a voice is added, by default it's off. You don't want it to just start playing when you add it. We'll change it to channel 10 so we can get drums. Drums are generally down in the lower range, like around C2. And if we just start playing it right at C2, we'll get the bass note, and then we can up that. We'll get other. Okay, so what I did there is I set the rhythm a little faster, got some 8th notes going in there, and then I upped the range so we could get, kick, snare, and some other sounds from the drums. And then you see there with 3 voices, each is, kind of has a nice vibe to it. Now, so here's where things get really interesting. So when you have this, so right now we have a zone that we kind of like that's producing, has its own character. And then if we want to preserve that, we can press this plus button over here under zones, and that's going to create, that basically captures all of these parameters into a zone that we can recall later. So if we click on zones, right now we have our zone we just created. That's the first one. And then you can click back over on chord or voices to go back to those and change how they're playing. Now, I said we would come back to these pin later. So by default, if you don't have the pin checked, when you make a zone, it's just saying generate a loop. So next time you play that zone, it's going to make a new loop. But if you really like the particular notes that it's playing, you can press this pin and it's going to pin that specific loop when you make that zone. So then now we have 2 zones, and you can see the little pin icon there. And the first one is the one we made that just said loop, but it's going to generate new loops. And now this one actually is saving these specific loops that we've got. So that's another cool thing you can do is, for example, if you want a different drum beat, you can turn the loop off and turn it back on, and it will just immediately generate a new beat. Let's say you want something a little more dense. You can turn that up, maybe turn off the quarter note, only 8th notes, and then if we unloop it, it's a little more active. And then you can choose to loop that, and then it's going to generate that loop. And then you can make a new zone out of that. So now we've strung together a couple zones here. And what you can then do, and this is where it gets really interesting, you can go back to these zones. So if we click that again. So what it just did is we went to those set of parameters and they're looping, but you can hear they created new loops compared to the first time that we generated those. Because as I said, it's just tells it to generate a loop, but it didn't save that specific loop notes. If we go to this one, So it brought back that pattern, and it's brought it back using it again. And you can actually use the arrow keys or the zone button here and go to the next zone. And you can hear that we brought back the more active drum beat now. Pretty cool. So that's kind of the basic overview of how you build these zones and the parameters. And then once you go in and to the voice, and you hear the zone, you like it, you can tweak the parameters to evolve the music and then preserve those as a string of zones. And then you can go back and transition through those zones. And so one thing we haven't talked about is chords, but you can also input a set of chords. So it starts in C by default. There's kind of a set of chords here. We can load that progression. That's just an example. You can load in your own chord progression. So the thing that you can hear now is, even though we're looping, all of the voices are following the new chord progression. And then based on whatever rule we've specified for that voice. So the bass voice is sticking to 1 and 5, and the keyboard voice is playing scale. So as long as that note fits in the scale, while it's looping, it's going to play that note. We could even change that while it's playing chord, and it will keep the same general pattern, but keep it within the chord structure that you have specified. All right, let's have a little fun and get this voice soloing, for example. So you can see you can change these parameters in real time and affect how the voice is playing, and then you can basically play this as an instrument and then create kind of phrases by turning it on and off. So you see I turned off the interval, and then started playing random notes. You can turn loops on, to make it do repeated phrases. Another neat thing to note is that it'll fill in the loop based on whatever the parameters are. So if we make it play really fast notes and I add beats, you see that it added those 1/8, which I guess are 30-second notes. And then if you subtract, it's just going to cut those out again, and then we could specify a different pattern. Maybe let's get the drums going a little more. So just like that, you can tweak things and then totally change the character of the music. And then that's kind of a cool space we've created, so we'll make a new zone out of that. And then remember, you can go back and bring back these other zones. And then another thing you'll see is it's preserving the whole state. So now we're back to playing in C. So if you want to make different zones that are playing different chord progressions, then we click back to where we were. It's going to go back to playing that chord progression we loaded previously. Yeah. So that's Soundipity. Have fun with it. And because this is generating the notes into Logic, so we've just recorded everything we just did got recorded into Logic. So you have all that preserved. There you go. Change the tempo also. And that gets preserved into zones as well. You'll see the zone list now. We've got the 120 BPM from before. We've got this new one at 160. All right, let's see what you can make with Soundipity.